April 8, 1943. North Atlantic, 400 miles west of Ireland. The sea was calm that morning, too calm for war. The gray swells rolled endlessly under a pale, cloud-streaked sky, the kind of deceptive quiet that made U-boat men uneasy. Below the surface, in the steel belly of U-404, Captain Lieutenant Otto von Bülow stood in the command room, the rhythmic hum of the diesel engines reverberating through the hull. For weeks, the crew had hunted convoys across the mid-Atlantic gap, the so-called Black Pit, a deadly stretch once beyond the reach of Allied aircraft. But even as von Bülow scanned the chart table, he knew that gap was closing fast. Allied aircraft were flying farther and longer than ever before. The ocean that had once been Germany's hunting ground was becoming a killing zone. He gave the order to surface. The ballast tanks hissed. Compressed air roared through the pipes. The submarine trembled as the bow tilted upward, and then, with a final surge, U-404 broke through the surface. The Atlantic exploded into light and air. Salt spray lashed the deck as the bridge hatch swung open. Petty Officer Klaus Ritter was first up the ladder, his oilskin dripping as he scanned the horizon through his binoculars. The sea stretched empty in every direction. Or so it seemed. Von Bülow emerged next, raising his head into the biting wind. "All ahead 1/3, he shouted to the helmsman below. "Maintain bearing 095. The diesels roared back to life, thick blue exhaust curling into the sky. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. The crew relished the fresh air after days submerged in stale diesel fumes. Cigarettes were lit. Conversations sparked in low voices. And then Ritter froze. He squinted toward the sun, lowering his binoculars, then lifting them again in disbelief. "Herr Kalun. Himmel, sehen Sie das," he shouted. Von Bülow followed his gaze, and his blood turned to ice. The horizon wasn't empty anymore. It was alive. Tiny black dots shimmered in the morning light, growing larger by the second. Dozens of them. No, scores. A dark swarm, stretching across the sky. Flugzeug. Ritter screamed. Bombers. Von Bülow didn't need a second look. Crash dive. Schnell. Tauchen. Tauchen. The klaxon wailed through the submarine. Boots thundered on the deck. The men scrambled down the conning tower hatch, sealing it behind them as the Atlantic rushed in. But the sea was too slow, and the sky too fast. The first B-24 Liberator roared overhead before U-404 even reached periscope depth. The engine's growl became a deafening, bone-shaking roar, followed by the whine of falling ordnance. The ocean erupted. Water columns burst skyward, showering the submarine as it slid beneath the surface. The once invincible U-boat fleet was no longer alone out here. The enemy had wings now, and the sky belonged to them. Down below, in the dim red light, von Bülow gripped the periscope handles, his jaw tight. He had seen the impossible. The sky above the Atlantic, once their shield of fog and distance, was filled with American bombers. And in that moment, he knew the Battle of the Atlantic had changed forever. The submarine groaned as it plunged deeper, the hull creaking like an old ship under ice. Inside U-404, red emergency lights pulsed against sweat-soaked faces. The crew moved in tense, rehearsed precision, valves spun, gauges were checked, depth meters ticked down. 70 meters, 80, the navigator called out. Von Bülow stood beside the diving officer, his knuckles white on the periscope stand. Level at 100 meters. Silent running. Stop all engines. The roar of the diesels died. In its place came the steady hum of the electric motors and the distant, muffled thunder of explosions above. The bombs were not close, yet, but each detonation echoed through the steel hull like a heartbeat of death. For years, German submarines had ruled these waters. The U-boat was the terror of the Atlantic, an unseen predator lurking beneath the waves, striking at convoys without warning, then vanishing. But now, the predator was prey. The Allies had learned. Von Bülow knew it. He'd seen the changes firsthand. Just months ago, his patrols had been easy pickings, merchant ships sailing unguarded, escorts too far to matter. Now, every convoy was ringed with destroyers, every horizon patrolled by aircraft that could stay aloft for 14 hours. He whispered to himself, "Liberators, they've come this far now?" The submarine groaned as it plunged deeper, the hull creaking like an old ship under ice. Inside U-404, red emergency lights pulsed against sweat-soaked faces. The crew moved in tense, rehearsed precision, valves spun, gauges were checked, depth meters ticked down. 70 meters, 80, the navigator called out. Von Bülow stood beside the diving officer, his knuckles white on the periscope stand. Level at 100 meters. Silent running. Stop all engines. The roar of the diesels died. In its place came the steady hum of the electric motors and the distant, muffled thunder of explosions above. The bombs were not close, yet, but each detonation echoed through the steel hull like a heartbeat of death. For years, German submarines had ruled these waters. The U-boat was the terror of the Atlantic, an unseen predator lurking beneath the waves, striking at convoys without warning, then vanishing. But now, the predator was prey. The Allies had learned. Von Bülow knew it. He'd seen the changes firsthand. Just months ago, his patrols had been easy pickings, merchant ships sailing unguarded, escorts too far to matter. Now, every convoy was ringed with destroyers, every horizon patrolled by aircraft that could stay aloft for 14 hours. He whispered to himself, "Liberators, they've come this far now?" Above them, the B-24s circled like vultures. Equipped with radar and depth charges, these long-range bombers had closed what the Germans once called the air gap. The mid-Atlantic, once a sanctuary, was now under constant surveillance. The sonar operator pressed his headset tighter, straining to listen through the static of the hydrophones. Multiple propeller contacts, fast-moving, he muttered. Pattern suggests air-dropped sonobuoys. Von Bülow's stomach tightened. They're hunting us. Outside, the sea was no longer empty, it was a battlefield. Suddenly, a hollow clang rattled the hull. A depth charge had landed close. Another followed, then 3 more. The submarine shuddered violently, lights flickering, loose tools clattering to the deck. One man crossed himself, another bit his lip so hard it bled. The control room filled with the sound of creaking metal and strained breathing. Every man knew what it meant if the next charge landed closer. A U-boat crushed at depth didn't explode, it imploded. The sea didn't burn, it swallowed. "Hold course," Von Bülow ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "They're trying to box us in. Don't give them our position." Minutes crawled into eternity. Each explosion above felt like fate deciding, one heartbeat at a time, whether U-404 would survive. And then, silence. The crew held their breath. The sonar operator turned one ear toward the receiver. "They're moving off, no contact." Von Bülow exhaled. "Surface in 30 minutes. They think we're finished." But even as relief washed through the control room, he knew it was temporary. The age of the U-boat wolf packs was ending. The Allies were no longer prey, they were everywhere, watching, waiting, hunting. Up there, above the gray Atlantic, the horizon no longer belonged to Germany. It belonged to the bombers. Nightfall brought no comfort. At 2,300 hours, U-404 surfaced once again, emerging into a world cloaked in darkness and mist. The stars were faint, swallowed by low clouds drifting across the Atlantic. A cold wind swept over the conning tower as the submarine's diesels rumbled back to life. The air reeked of oil and salt, and every creak of the steel hull echoed across the water like a whisper of fate. Captain-Lieutenant Otto von Bülow raised his binoculars, scanning the black horizon. The attack that morning had shaken his crew, but worse than the bombs was what they represented. The Allied aircraft weren't supposed to be here. This was the Mid-Atlantic Gap, the stretch too far for land-based patrols, the one refuge left to the U-boats. But now, the Americans had found a way to close even that. "Radioman," von Bülow said quietly. "Report to BDU. Grid Square AM 21. Enemy air patrol encountered. Survived attack. Jol, Herr Kaloon." The radioman's hand hesitated over the transmitter key. He knew that every signal risked being intercepted by Allied direction finders. The airwaves themselves were dangerous now. Still, he tapped out the message in Morse, brief and coded. Von Bülow turned to his watch officer, Oberleutnant Weber. "We'll run west under cover of darkness. Maintain radio silence afterward." Weber nodded, his eyes hollow. "If they're reaching this far, sir, the others won't be safe either." The captain didn't answer. He didn't have to. Across the Atlantic, dozens of other U-boats were out there, each one alone, hunted, forced deeper and farther than before. The wolf packs that once prowled the shipping lanes were scattering, blind and desperate. The men on deck huddled in their greatcoats, scanning the skies. Even at night, they felt the enemy overhead. The B-24s sometimes flew in darkness, guided by radar beams invisible to the human eye. You couldn't hear them coming. You couldn't see them until it was too late. Just after midnight, the radar detector screamed, a sharp electronic wail that froze every man in place. "Aircraft contact," the operator shouted. "Damn it," von Bülow hissed. "Hard to port. Prepare to dive." The diesel engines thundered as the sub began to turn. Far above, a dark shape loomed against the clouds, a silhouette with 4 engines and a glimmer of light beneath its wings. Searchlights burst through the night. The ocean turned white under their beams as the B-24 dropped from the sky, releasing a cluster of depth charges that splashed down in a deadly pattern. The blasts followed seconds later, deep, concussive, earth-shattering. U-404 rocked violently. Men were thrown from their stations, one striking his head against a bulkhead. Alarms blared as a pipe split, spraying a jet of seawater across the control room. "We're hit amidships," Weber shouted. "Shut it off. Seal the compartment," von Bülow barked, gripping the periscope base for balance. The sub lurched again, groaning under the pressure. "Get us down, 200 meters." The diving officer spun the wheels, his face pale. "Ballast flooding, going down fast." The gauges spun wildly as the submarine descended. The lights flickered, then steadied, the hum of the electric motors barely masking the sound of groaning steel. Finally, the depth needle steadied at 210 meters. The sea pressed in around them, silent and infinite. "Hold her steady," von Bülow ordered. He looked around the control room, the faces of men illuminated in the dim red glow, their eyes wide, their hands shaking. None of them spoke. None had to. They all knew what the sky above them looked like now, filled not with stars, but with death. For the first time, the German submariners understood what it meant to be hunted without mercy. And above them, the American B-24s turned eastward, their silhouettes fading into the night, engines echoing faintly over the endless ocean. The sky over the Atlantic no longer hid the wolves. It exposed them. Dawn came gray and bitter. Inside U-404, the air was thick with oil fumes, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. Condensation dripped from the pipes, forming tiny puddles on the steel floor. The men worked in silence, faces drawn, uniforms damp, hands trembling as they checked gauges and patched leaks. Von Bülow sat hunched at the plotting table, his eyes tracing the convoy routes on the chart. His pencil paused at a thick black line marked Air Patrol Range, B-24. It stretched nearly to the center of the Atlantic now. So this was it, the cage tightening. He had read the reports. The Allies were deploying new escort carriers, small aircraft carriers that could sail with convoys, launching planes far out to sea. Each one brought squadrons of Avenger bombers and Wildcats that could loiter over the ocean for hours. Combined with the long-range B-24 Liberators from Iceland, Newfoundland, and the Azores, there was no safe water left. The last sanctuary of the U-boat arm was gone. A young mechanic entered the control room, wiping grease from his hands. "Herr Calhoun, the electric motor in compartment 4 is running hot. We'll need to surface to cool it." Von Bülow's jaw tightened. Surface? After what had happened last night? But the batteries were nearly drained. Without the diesels, they'd be dead in the water. He gave a slow nod. "Prepare to surface. Do it quickly, and God help us if they see us." The crew snapped into motion. Ballast tanks hissed. The sub began to rise. The depth gauge ticked upward, 150 meters. 100. 60. 20. Then light broke through the periscope lens. Von Bülow lifted the scope, sweeping the horizon. Nothing but gray seas and low clouds. No contrails. No aircraft. For the moment, the Atlantic seemed empty again. "Surface," he said. The hatch opened with a hiss of cold air. The captain climbed onto the bridge, the wind biting his face. The sea stretched endless and lifeless. The crew began ventilating the interior, pumping fresh air into the stale depths. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. But peace never lasted long at sea. At 0900 hours, the lookout spotted smoke on the horizon, 3 columns rising faintly against the clouds. "Merchantman. A convoy. Contact, bearing 085, shouted the watch officer. Von Bülow's instincts took over. "Set course to intercept. Prepare tubes 1 through 4. Load G7E torpedoes." Below deck, the men sprang to their posts. After days of running, it felt good to be the hunter again. The submarine angled east, closing the distance. The convoy was slow, probably British, escorted by a handful of corvettes. They were just 6,000 meters away when it happened. A glint of sunlight off aluminum. Then another. Von Bülow's head snapped upward. His binoculars locked on the sky, and his stomach dropped. 2 dark specks, growing larger. Flugzeug. He slammed his fist on the hatch. Crash dive. Schnell. The klaxon screamed. The crew dove for their stations as the boat plunged once more. The sea swallowed them, but not fast enough. The B-24s were already overhead. Depth charges splashed down around the sub, exploding in rapid succession. The hull groaned under the strain, lights flickering again. Water sprayed through a new seam. Von Bülow steadied himself, shouting over the chaos. "Keep her level. Don't exceed test depth." Another explosion. The deck tilted violently, men tumbling across the room. Someone screamed from the engine compartment, steam hissing through a broken valve. For the next 10 minutes, the ocean was a wall of fire and thunder. And then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The explosions faded. The sea went still again. In the eerie silence, Von Bülow realized what the men already feared: they hadn't been attacking at random. The bombers knew exactly where they were. "Radar," he muttered. "They have radar now." A new kind of terror set in, one that even experience couldn't fight. The enemy could see through the air inside you. 404 had turned sour again, heavy with smoke, diesel exhaust, and fear. The electric motors hummed weakly, their heat radiating through the cramped compartments. Every man could feel the ocean pressing down above them, an invisible weight that seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. Captain Lieutenant Otto von Bülow leaned against the periscope stand, his face slick with sweat. Around him, the crew worked in near silence, muted movements, whispered orders, the hiss of leaking pipes. The submarine was wounded. "Damage report," he said finally. Chief Engineer Schenk approached, clutching a clipboard smeared with oil. "We've got minor flooding in the aft compartments. One battery cell ruptured. The steering linkage is stiff but functional. Electric motors are overheating, we can't stay submerged long." Von Bülow rubbed his eyes. "We surface, we die. We stay down, we suffocate." No one answered. The reality was clear. The old advantage of the U-boat, its ability to vanish beneath the waves, was slipping away. The Allies had found them, tracked them, hunted them with machines that could see through the dark. And it wasn't just radar anymore. Von Bülow knew the rumors: magnetic anomaly detectors, high-frequency direction finding, even aircraft equipped with infrared. The enemy's technology was evolving faster than Germany could react. "Battery at 40%, the engineer said quietly. Von Bülow nodded. "Hold depth at 150. Maintain silent running, he ocean itself." He stared at the condensation dripping from the ceiling, his mind wandering to the early days of the war, when they'd sailed from St. Nazaire like ghosts, confident and fearless. The Atlantic had seemed endless then, an ocean of opportunity. Merchantmen burned on the horizon, and Berlin called them heroes. Now, the ocean felt like a coffin. Hours passed in oppressive silence. The temperature climbed. Sweat trickled down faces and dripped onto the steel floor. Someone coughed, another man muttered a prayer. The rhythmic ticking of the depth gauge became a kind of heartbeat. Then, faintly, came a new sound. The sonar operator straightened, pressing his headset tighter. "Her Kowloon, propellers. Multiple. Slow speed. Bearing 240. Von Bülow's pulse quickened. "Surface vessels?" "Yes, sir. Pattern suggests corvettes." He didn't need to ask how the British had found them again. The convoy escorts must have picked up the sonar buoys dropped by the bombers. The aircraft had marked their position, and now the hunters were coming to finish the kill. "Helm, change course 060. 1 knot, Von Bülow ordered. Silent running. Prepare for depth charges." Every man on board froze, waiting for the sound they dreaded most. The first ping echoed through the hull. A slow, deliberate knock that grew louder as the British sonar swept across them. "Ping, ping, ping. They have us," the sonar operator whispered. Moments later, the sea erupted. Depth charges detonated in rapid bursts, the shock waves slamming into the submarine like fists. The lights went out, plunging them into darkness. Men were thrown against the bulkheads, tools and charts scattered across the floor. The control room filled with the stench of smoke and seawater. "Pressure rising in compartment 2, someone shouted. "Seal it off," Von Bülow barked. "Keep her level." But another explosion hit, even closer this time. The hull groaned. A pipe burst overhead, spraying the captain with freezing water. The engineer shouted, "Hull integrity failing. We can't take another hit." Von Bülow's hand tightened on the railing. His voice, low but calm, cut through the chaos, "Prepare to surface. We fight on the surface or die here." The men stared at him, some in disbelief, others with grim resolve. The order went out. Ballast tanks blew. Compressed air roared through the sub as U-404 clawed her way toward the surface. Meters ticked upward, 180. 150. 100. Then light broke through the shattered periscope lens. The sea greeted them with chaos. 2 corvettes closing in. Overhead, the drone of aircraft returning to the hunt. Von Bülow climbed the ladder to the bridge, the wind slamming against his face as he emerged into daylight. The sky was gray, the horizon crawling with enemies. "Man the flak guns," he shouted. "All hands to stations." The gunners swung the twin 20mm mounts upward, opening fire. Tracers streaked into the sky, orange threads against the clouds. The first B-24 dived, releasing its payload in a deadly arc. The bombs hit close, too close. A column of water engulfed the bridge. The shockwave tore through the hull. Von Bülow felt the deck buckle beneath his feet, his body hurled backward by the force. Somewhere below, the engines screamed. Then came the sound every submariner feared, the deep, metallic crack of a hull beginning to give way. The Atlantic was claiming U-404. And as the sea swallowed the submarine, von Bülow thought of all the other U-boats scattered across the vast ocean, each one fighting the same hopeless battle against a sky that now ruled the sea. The hunters of the deep were dying, not from courage, but from progress. By the summer of 1943, the tide of the Atlantic War had turned. Where once dozens of gray wolves prowled unseen across the shipping lanes, now only wrecks and oil slicks marked their graves. The Allied air patrols had made the surface a death trap, and the sea below was no longer deep enough to hide. From his base in Lorient, Admiral Karl Donitz read the grim reports arriving daily from the Atlantic. His desk was covered in them, each one a simple, coded summary of disaster. U-223 lost, no survivors. U-332 missing since June 12, U-259 destroyed by aircraft off the Azores. The numbers were staggering. In just 2 months, 41 U-boats gone. Nearly 2,000 men. The hunters had become ghosts. Donitz stood by the window of his headquarters, gazing out at the pens where the surviving U-boats sat, scarred, silent, and useless. Mechanics swarmed over their hulls, patching shrapnel holes and repainting the iron crosses, but no coat of paint could hide the truth. The Kriegsmarine's most feared weapon had been outmatched. "The Atlantic is no longer ours," he muttered. Behind him, staff officers waited in tense silence. "Herr Grossadmiral," said Captain Zur C. George Lassen, "our losses cannot continue. The men are breaking. We've had crews refusing to sail." Donitz turned sharply. "Refusing?" Lassen hesitated. "They know what awaits them, sir. They call it the Todsfahrt, the death voyage." The admiral's face hardened. He understood. Every captain who left port now did so knowing his odds of survival were less than 1 in 4. The Atlantic had become a graveyard, and every patrol felt like suicide. But pride, and propaganda, demanded that the U-boats keep fighting. Berlin still called for victory. Far out in the mid-Atlantic, another U-boat, U-489, commanded by Oberleutnant Hans-Joachim Haller, was learning that lesson firsthand. It was July 3, 1943. The morning was bright, the sea calm. Haller's men had surfaced to recharge batteries, their diesel engines churning the water into foam. The crew, exhausted and filthy, stood along the deck catching the first fresh air in days. Cigarettes glowed between cracked lips. Then came the distant hum. At first it was faint, just a vibration in the air. Then louder. A droning sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The lookout's cry shattered the calm. "Aircraft. Bearing 180. Haller grabbed his binoculars. A formation of B-24 Liberators approached from the south, their wings glinting in the sunlight. The Americans had found them again. Crash dive. Schnell. The men scrambled down the hatch. The sub plunged beneath the surface, but not fast enough. The first Liberator made its run, dropping a spread of depth charges directly across the submarine's wake. The explosions rocked U-489 like a storm. The lights went out, equipment flew from the shelves, men screamed as pipes burst. Haller fought to regain control. Level her out. Depth 100 meters. But the boat was too damaged. Water gushed through a torn vent line. The sub began to sink uncontrollably. He had one choice left. Blow all ballast. Surface. All hands, prepare to abandon ship. U-489 broke through the surface, gasping for air like a dying creature. Haller and his men climbed out into the sunlight, where the sea burned around them. The bombers circled above, preparing another run. The crew leapt into the freezing Atlantic as the final salvo fell. The submarine vanished beneath a geyser of foam and flame. Hours later, only a few survivors floated among the wreckage. British aircraft circled overhead, dropping rafts and smoke markers. For the first time in the long, brutal war beneath the waves, mercy came from above. Back in Lorya, Donitz received the signal, U-489 destroyed. 12 survivors rescued by enemy aircraft. He closed his eyes. The report joined the pile of others. The wolf packs were finished. The war at sea had entered a new age, one fought not by unseen hunters in the deep, but by machines that ruled the air. The Atlantic, once Germany's greatest battlefield, was now its grave. And high above, the B-24 Liberators continued their endless patrols, their shadows sweeping across the water like the wings of a new empire.